Awesome, we're live.
All right, everyone, I think we are live. Thank you all for attending. We have a great audience today for our candidates for the Culxr event. This is an all district city council candidate forum, which we're really excited to bring to you today. We have myself, Joaquin Fox, who I just really believe in the mission of bringing candidates closer to community and ensuring that we have a direct connection to get our questions answered and to facilitate a real relationship with the community that people will be representing. I think that's really important. And so we're really excited to host this event with you all. Obviously, we're really grateful for Culxr House and Marcy Yates, who's the director of Culxr House, giving us the space and the opportunity to collab on this event. Also, really great to have Noise and a couple of their folks helping us with this event. So we have Dewan helping us with all the technical assistance and getting us live on Facebook and live streaming this for us. And then we'll also have Myles Davis, who's a noisemaker, be facilitating this conversation today. So again, we're really excited to have you all. Obviously, we are coming off of a high amount of energy after this national election. We want to make sure that we're continuing that energy into our local races, which are going to be what's most important about how we live our day-to-day lives. And so to make sure that our candidates are representing us well and are creating those relationships that establish real representative politics, we wanted to have this event and really bring that energy to our city council race, because there's obviously been a ton of contentious moments leading up to now in those city races. And this will be a good way for us to get to know you all as people and for people to start those relationships with you. So I'm really excited for you all to be here today. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Myles Davis, who will be facilitating the conversation, and will take us through the questioning. There will be some introductions from you all as candidates. There will be a couple questions that we've predetermined. We'll do some yes or no's. I know people love to try to give a little bit more explanation on the yes or no's, but it's a yes or no for a reason. So we're going to put you on the spot with some of those questions, and then we'll save some time at the end for question and answer from community. So if you are a listener and are thinking up questions, feel free to throw those into the chats or write them down so you remember what you want to ask, and we'll make sure that we get to you throughout this event. So thank you all so much for being here today. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Myles Davis.
Hi, everybody. Let me get this mask off. Okay. Thank you, Joaquin. So I'm Myles Davis, noisemaker, digital marketing strategist at Noise. So I'll be your moderator today. I just want to jump right in and get started with introductions. Just your name, your district, why you think you're qualified, uniquely qualified to run for city council. So we can start with Sarah, since she's right to my right. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Sarah Smolen. I'm running for City Council District 4. And what makes me qualified is, as a teacher, I spend all my time making English language arts accessible to 7th graders and giving them the information they need to empower themselves to take that and do what they will with it. And so as a city councilor, I plan on doing that with local government as well, making it accessible to the people so that they are empowered to take action.
Cammy.
Hi, my name is Cammy Watkins. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am running for District 3 City Council. And I feel what makes me qualified is that I'm not only a resident, lifelong resident of Omaha, but also a community activist and organizer that's been working for almost 2 decades, pushing for equality, equity, justice in our community. And I think it's time that we have more activists, city officials in our city government.
Thank you, Destiny.
Destiny Stark in District 5, she, her, hers pronoun. I am a labor leader, and I have made strides within my own very male-dominated industry to be more inclusive to all, particularly women, LGBTQ+, and then also provide a voice for any other BIPOC community members in our industry.
Great, thank you. Jonathan?
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Lathan. I'm born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. So I spent 14 years in the military. I came back and I still see some of the same concerns going on in District 2, and that's why I'm running for the District 2 City Council seat. I'm a father of 5, so with that being said, I'm really looking forward to what I can bring to the future for not only my children, but for all the children that reside in District 2 and Omaha, Nebraska.
Great, thank you. Mark?
Thank you. My name is Mark Vondrasek. I'm running to be the next city councilor for District 3. And the reason I'm running is because I believe that we need regular everyday workers who are living paycheck to paycheck, working for wages to be in government. I'm running as a socialist. I am currently still registered as a Democrat, but I'll be changing that to an independent soon. And I'm running as a socialist because I believe that workers need to be in charge of our homes, of our workplaces, and in the government. And that's why I'm running.
All right, thank you. Craig?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Craig Moody. Pronouns are he, him, his. I am not a native Omahan, but I've lived in the city for over 20 years now, so it's home. I'm currently on the OPPD Board of Directors as the chair, and historically, predating that, did a lot of things in the community to move us forward towards a more sustainable, resilient, and just future. So I've been able to, over the course of my 20 years in Omaha, affect change in a lot of positive different ways through a variety of different roles. And I foresee my role in City Council in District 3 being a manifestation of a lot of that work coming together.
All right, thank you. So we'll just jump right into questions. Of course, we won't be able to have everyone answer each question, but if you have something you specifically would like to say, just please raise your hand and we'll call on you, and then we'll go like that. So the first question is, what is your perspective on development and how do you differentiate between revitalization and gentrification? How about Cammy?
Thanks. So I believe that redevelopment is important, but gentrification can be a problem. Gentrification, ultimately, I see as kind of an example of disaster capitalism, in which the disaster is the disaster of poverty, and that we find developers taking advantage of poverty as a way to profit and find low-cost abilities and ways to develop. So it's important for us to make sure that as we're looking at development, that we're being conscientious of the impacts that it can have on communities, and particularly those places where it's more advantageous to redevelop. So I think we have to start really watching for signs of gentrification in our community, and putting more, not just on an activist level of individuals being able to say, oh, okay, we're watching and trying to monitor this and make sure that it's just my responsibility as a community member living there to not do it, but I think it needs to be more institutional, where our city is keeping us eye on those things like hotspots for evictions, which we have all the data for, really monitoring and watching those majority non-white neighborhoods that are particularly being targeted for gentrification right now. I think we also have to address the barriers to affordable housing. We don't have currently in our city's master plan a definition for affordable housing, and that master plan needs to be revised and revamped because it's not really addressing the needs of today.
Awesome. So when it comes to housing gentrification issues, Craig, I would love to hear your input. I saw that you were kind of agreeing with some things that Cammy was saying. What is your perspective on these issues?
Yeah, Cammy's right. I mean, gentrification is I don't think it's a problem that we're sort of like looking towards in the future. I think it's here now. And there's no question about it that what concerns me is that our city has no plan for addressing it. You know, growth and development is important to our city's success longer term. Density is important to our success longer term. So this is going to continue to happen. And you know, we often paint developers in a really negative light because they're the ones who are sort of catalyzing a lot of it. But I think because we don't have any sort of cohesive, organized plan, as Cammy said, the city's master plan is woefully out of date. This is something that if we don't get organized on it, if we don't get all the stakeholders at the table as soon as possible and really identify what the outcomes the outcomes that we want as a community, it's going to continue to get worse and worse and more contentious and contentious. So a big part of what I think is really important, and this is a theme through a lot of the issues that we talk about, is collaborative, equitable stakeholder engagement to really kind of define where we want to go with a lot of this, and to identify what the city's role is in ensuring that we have quality, safe, affordable housing as we continue to grow and expand and gain more density.
Okay, thank you. Mark, I would love to hear your opinion on this as well.
Could you repeat the question real quick?
Yeah, the question was, What is your perspective on development, and how do you differentiate revitalization and gentrification?
Thank you. My perspective on development is that in the city of Omaha, it's completely led and controlled by corporations. I view the Chamber of Commerce and as sort of an extension, the nonprofit industrial complex that's active here in Omaha, as a sort of like twin government to our own elected representatives. The Chamber of Commerce, these developers, they sort of get together, they make their plans, and then they bring their plans to the government, and our government, you know, checks the right boxes and makes things happen. And there's no plan from the city. Cammy mentioned there's no plan in the city master plan. It doesn't even define affordable housing. So there's no way to hold politicians accountable to it. I sort of define gentrification. It's definitely happening all over the place, and there are sort of moderate steps that we can take to address it, and then there are more radical steps. I'd like to introduce rent control to the city of Omaha. I'd like to sort of completely remake TIF so that TIF is only given to low-income housing units. Let me take a step back. When I say rent control, all I mean is that when we build low-income units, we make sure those rents stay that way in perpetuity. So they just always stay low-income rents. So we got rent control. We need to reform TIF so that we're not giving taxpayer money to corporations that boast about how wealthy they are. And that's just a start to how we can start to address gentrification.
Awesome. Jonathan, what do you think?
Right. So affordable housing is definitely something that District 2 has had a concern with. One thing that was implemented recently to combat this was the Omaha Land Bank. And that's definitely been used as a foundation and help people get into better living situations. The thing to see with that Omaha Land Bank, though, is that some of the redevelopers and potential landlords need to come from our area, come from our district, because they're more invested in the area. What's happening is there are a lot of developers that are coming from outside of the district, and then they're making these homes unaffordable to the residents that are already there, which is contributing to the gentrification. One thing I have noticed, I've been at a lot of the city council meetings over the last couple of months, and Holy Name Housing is using that TIF financing, like Mark just mentioned, trying to improve the quality of living down in District 2 specifically. So when that got improved, or when that increase was improved on the ballot, I was actually pretty happy for the districts of resident too. Another thing that I would like to do is improve the landlord registry, because we need to start identifying those predatory landlords who are making the residents feel like they don't deserve better living situations than they're currently in. So that's one thing I would do as far as the landlord registry. And then also I propose that any new developers that come into District 2 are required to set aside some of those housing areas to low-income residents. So if you're going to build a new development down 24th Street as far as market rate housing, then some of those housing developments or some of those housing units should be set aside for the low-income residents of that area, so that way you're not pushing them out. And I know that that's a comprehensive housing strategy, like Craig was saying and like Cammy was saying, that we need, like cities like Denver and Atlanta have that, where the city does actually control the housing market, or not the housing market, but they have a housing strategy and a plan that stops residents from being pushed out of their general areas where they usually live in.
Great. So Jonathan and Mark kind of touched on enforcement. Does anyone have any other thoughts about what that would look like to help control some of these issues or help drive these issues? Destiny.
I don't really know if I have much more to expand upon that at this moment. Most of our other panelists have already taken most of my talking points that I had prepared, unfortunately.
All right, thank you. All right, well, we'll move on to the. Oh, Sarah.
Yeah, like I said, everybody's kind of touched on a lot of the big ones that I think would do a lot to improve the problem of gentrification in Omaha. Another thing, though, I would like to focus on is I just think there needs to be constant evaluation of the programs that we are using to ensure that they are still being used in the way that they were intended, and if they're still effective or no longer effective. And then something I'd like to draw attention to here in South Omaha, there's a nonprofit called Canopy South that is working on sort of a positive development model for this, and they follow the purpose-built communities model that's being used, I think, in Atlanta, which is a really neat. They just got off the ground And then the pandemic definitely slowed them down with their work. But they're working on their emphasis are mixed income housing. So they would build affordable housing, and then only 30% of the housing there would be market value, and everything else would be for like middle and low income housing. And then cradle to career education, so just putting an emphasis on education from early childhood all the way through to career readiness. And then just community vibrancy is their final one, just in putting an emphasis on the diversity that is in the communities. And so they are doing a great work. I think they have plans. I think 75 North does something very similar. And so I think giving priority and putting emphasis on those organizations would definitely help to slow gentrification and promote revitalization.
Cammy?
Yeah, and just to add to the enforcement question, so I think essentially we do have to hold developers and landlords accountable. And that could be certain ways of like revoking permits for developers if they're breaking development rules, or for landlords restricting their abilities to rent properties if they're having countless code violations. Because we see, though, in Omaha, we typically play the long game, where landlords will sometimes, if they see an area.
Oh no, she froze.
Oh, did I come back? I know, I was like, I froze for a second. Okay. We'll sometimes see areas like in that Blackstone, the large Blackstone apartments, where they just slowly stopped doing maintenance, where the living conditions were so bad that people on their own moved out. And so then they just didn't refill them. And then it was able to naturally empty, that then they were able to gentrify that building. But if we then we're able to stop this. So stricter oversight, proactive on the city's end of monitoring and checking for code violations and making sure that we're meeting those needs, but also community engaged oversight in partnership with decision makers.
Okay, awesome. Mark, do you have something else you would like to say?
Just that as a part of reforming TIF, there's a lot of landlords that come before city council multiple times, and there's always this discussion about, well, you've got so many code violations. What are you going to do about all these code violations? And there's never any consequences for these landlords. They just keep giving out these subsidies to them. One way I think we could fix that problem and create low-income housing in the process, when landlords start to not take care of their properties on purpose because they think maybe they're going to sell it to another developer to be raised and build another building there or something. Once you get so many code violations, I think the city should just take the property from you and put it into the land bank and then recycle that house into a low income program and then put that rent control on there. And then we created low income housing. We've created an incentive for landlords to take better care of their properties. I think that would be a good way to reform TIF.
Great, what do you think?
Yeah, just real quick, somebody mentioned the fact that we've got good data on evictions. I mean, I think that's one of the things that the city does a really kind of average to poor job of collecting data writ large and sharing it with the community and constituencies. And that cuts across all departments, police or otherwise. And this is a very good case in point where, simply tracking homelessness and evictions is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more data that the city should take an active lead role in collecting, organizing, sharing, so that we can tell a clearer story about what our housing market is like. There is a housing crisis. Gentrification is happening, but I think we're arguing about it, or at least this group isn't arguing about it, but others are arguing about it because we don't have data around it. And I think it's really important that we get that data, get some key indicators, and start to understand how we want to move forward so that we can measure our progress as we go.
Speaking of the housing crisis, there was a housing crisis before the pandemic. The pandemic has certainly exacerbated that crisis. What is your solution to affordable housing crisis, and what partners would you include to solve this? We kind of touched on your thoughts on housing crisis, but what partners do you think that you would include to solve this? Cammy?
Oh, am I unmuted still?
Yeah, you're unmuted.
Okay, perfect. So I think some of the partners that I would look at are organizations like In Common and Spark CDI. My biggest concern is if when we start talking about investing in addressing the housing crisis, the largest people that are impacted by the housing crisis are our lower income folks making less than 50% of AMI, our workforce individuals making 35,000 to 60,000, and then our seniors. And organizations like Spark CDI and In Common and One Omaha already have in place things to work with community members where we're centering the community members impacted by these housing crises in the fix. So I want to involve them. I'd also make sure that we have to be engaging, because we cannot talk about our housing crisis without also talking about people experiencing homelessness. And if we're not addressing the homelessness issues that are coming ultimately from the fact that Omaha, like our most recent developments, are having costs per square footage that are close to that of housing in California. And so if our main attraction in this city is our low cost of living, and we have not elevated our pay scales to match what we're charging for our cost of living, that's a huge issue. So we're gonna need to get employers involved in addressing this, because if we're not really interested in investing more in affordable housing, we absolutely need to start paying our people more. So we need businesses, we need developers, we need our community organizers and leaders, as well as community organizations that are looking at how are we creating these spaces for people to live, but also we need to increase our basic thriving wages in the city so that people can afford to live, because housing isn't a luxury, it's an absolute necessity.
Thank you. Sarah? Yes, Sarah.
Yeah, I love what Cammy said about just like increasing wages. There's got to be something that's coming, evening out. Either we're increasing wages or we're lowering affordable housing so that people can actually afford it. And I think specifically when we talk about the homelessness crisis, I know we need to clearly define what solving that looks like, because I know some cities just count it as, oh, they're not sleeping on the street, therefore they're not homeless, but that's not sustainable, and that's not going to keep them off the street. It just keeps them off for a night. So we need to put into those affordable housing. There needs to be jobs that provide a livable wage that actually can be sustained. And then also they need to have that housing that's readily available. And I think as a community, we need to decide that housing is a basic human right, safe and affordable housing. So, enforcing those codes to make sure that everybody is living in a home that, is secure and isn't a hazard to their health is extremely important. And being like very, very, very strict on enforcing that especially for our landlords. And, I'm sure there'll be some backlash from them, but, again, housing is a basic human right. You don't get to treat people poorly because you get to make more money off of it. So yeah, absolutely. And then I think we do, as far as like our budget, we need to be setting aside funding that is specifically for creating and maintaining affordable housing. And that's probably going to be a fight. It's fine. But yeah, when there is a budget set aside from that is only for that, not being filtered into other things, and being given the priority to use local investors, not like the big companies from out west, but people in each district to provide that housing where they can, it has to be a priority to maintain that. Thank you.
Destiny, I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, affordable housing is definitely an issue in our entire city. If we're working 40 hours a week for our minimum wage of $9 an hour, that's still only $18,000 an hour or a year before taxes. That means that over 50% of our normal income is going towards even medium-sized housing situations. So we do need to make more affordable, low-income housing a priority in all of our districts, because we do have folks in every single district that is necessary for.
Thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Okay. Craig, did you have something?
Are you just asking on housing in general or on Destiny's comments?
No, just partnerships in general.
Okay, no, I'm good.
Okay, awesome. So what would partnerships in city council look like for you all? Also including relationships with leaders like mayor or others. What would that look like for you all? Who would like to start? Sarah, go ahead.
So this question is actually one of my favorites. So as a teacher, I spend all day working with other teachers, with administrators, with counselors, with parents, working on the sole purpose of the success of an individual student. And so everyone's collaborating together, we're sharing resources, we're discussing, we're evaluating with one goal in mind, and that is the success and well-being of a student. And so I think city leadership should be focusing on that. The student is our city and our citizens, and we should be focused on the success and well-being of them. So that means a lot of collaboration. It means uplifting and supporting one another when we have the opportunities, working together on ordinances, doing the research together, connecting people with resources so that they can get the information and the help they need. But it also means accountability and just holding one another up to the priority. The priority is the city, it's the citizens, it's their quality of life. And we have to hold one another accountable for that, reminding each other of why we're doing this and if it's beneficial to the people who need it most. Many of us here, like here in the forum and outside of the forum, are already working and interacting with one another. We're supporting each other's campaigns, we're talking, we're collaborating. And I think those relationships will carry through into the election and then into whoever ends up in those positions. And I think that speaks to just our willingness that we do. It seems like everybody here has a priority of making the city and making our citizens the goal. Their happiness, their success, their well-being is our goal. So I'm really excited about the group here and the way that we're collaborating, and I think we can carry that through to other city leadership.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, yeah, I had to unmute myself, sorry. All right, so one thing that I definitely learned, like I said, serving in the Army for 14 years taught me a lot about networking and balancing professional relationships. I didn't really get along with everybody all the time, but I knew that at the end of the day, there was a common goal that we all had to reach and meet in order to make our quality of living better just in that situation. So one of the first things I looked at when I decided to run for the city council was the city charter. And with Omaha being based on a strong mayor system that it is, any proposal that any of us have is going to take 4 votes to get that even passed at the city council level. So we're going to have to learn to work together as council people. If somebody wants to do affordable housing, or if Mark ends up, trying to pass a resolution for his socialist areas, then he's going to need the help of 3 other council members to get to that point. So I can't get my plans to make my district better enacted unless I'm working with the other council members that are there. One of the main things as far as working with the mayor is going to be essentially giving warm handoffs for some of my proposals as far as turn back taxes are concerned. Marriage Park is in our district, and so is the CHI Arena. So I feel like we need to get more revenue back from those events when they are hosted in our area, but I'm going to need the mayor's help to introduce me to the people that are sitting at the table with that specifically done. And then also with the police union contract negotiations coming up next week, that's going to be a large level of contention. And I've made sure that I've been trying to develop a working relationship with the union president, because I feel like if I'm cordial with him, and well, I mean, I say cordial, if I can have a professional relationship with him, then the concerns and needs of the residents of my district specifically will be more receptive. He'll be more receptive to that as far as some of the things that I bring to him, like I said. Excuse me, especially with that union contract negotiations coming up, or the public hearing coming up next Tuesday. So we've got to learn to start building relationships with the individuals, even if we don't always agree with them, because we have to consider that anything that we want to do for our districts or for the city of Omaha is larger than us and how we feel about certain things in certain situations sometimes.
So since Jonathan brought up Mark, what do you think about partnerships and relationships?
Thank you. I actually, with respect to the first 2 people who have spoken, I have a little bit of a different opinion about the idea of partnering with other people in government. I think that government is a little bit different than normal sort of co-worker situations at our jobs, or even like participating in the Army. I think that your job when you go into government is to get elected because of the values that you're going to take there, and then to fight for those values when you get there. I believe that if you start from a place of compromise, you're going to give more territory to your opponent, who also might be your enemy, but that's not necessarily the case. As far as partnerships go, I don't think that Gene Stothert wants to partner with me on defunding the police. And I don't think Gene Stothert wants to partner with me about not spending $2 billion to widen the interstate. And I don't think Gene Stothert really wants to partner with anybody about creating a plan for Omaha that's going to be a radical, bold, action-based plan for climate change for the city of Omaha. Gene Stothert isn't interested in doing any of those things. And I think you could even argue that she is diametrically opposed to those ideas and to those things. So when we get involved in government, I think we have to be ready to be principled in opposition to what we're going to go and do in government. And I don't think that anyone here is a part of their platform is I'm going to go to city council and flip tables and scream at my opponents at the council meetings or anything like that. I think every single one of us is perfectly willing, perfectly capable of going to city council saying, I disagree with what you say. I think you're completely wrong. I'm not going to budge on what I think on this particular issue. But there are instances where partnership is not possible because partnership involves two people with the same goals. And although I think that sometimes it would be noble to think that we all care about the citizens of Omaha and we want good for everyone, good is different for every person. And sometimes someone's goals might be detrimental to someone's life. And so I know that we're all probably a little relieved based on the outcome of the presidential election, but I'm not as secure in my faith in our government institutions right now as some other people might be. And I think that we need to make dramatic change in government. And I'm going to be a different kind of candidate and I'm going to behave differently if you elect me to the city council.
Hey, Mark, so without these partners, how do you plan to make it happen? Who do you bring to the table to make some things shake?
It's not a matter of, I'm obviously not going to be King Mark and I'm not going to have any partners. And that's how I'm going to accomplish my goals because I'm just going to convince people to support me in total. That's not going to happen, as Jonathan said. I'm going to have to take votes, lose some votes. I don't intend to vote yes on any TIF funding that comes before me. I've been attending city council meetings for the past 3 years now, and there are very few TIF projects other than maybe the ones that Jonathan mentioned that I believe should get TIF funding. So there are things that you have to go and hold a line for. I'll work with anybody. If Gene Stothert wants to have a reasonable conversation with me, it's like I said, I'm not gonna go to city council and scream at Gene Stothert every time I'm in the same room with her. I'll work with Gene Stothert. I'll work with any community partner who shares my values and wants to move in a progressive direction to actually guarantee housing as a human right to every single person. But we have to admit that there are opponents and even in some cases, enemies who are diametrically opposed to the goals that we have as progressives. And that's why I'm running as a socialist, is so you know that I'm a little bit different than Democrats who will work with people who are diametrically opposed to their interests in the name of compromise with their enemies.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Craig, what do you think? Cammy will come to you after Craig.
This is an interesting conversation, and I'm really enjoying it. Yeah, so I tend to be a pretty collaborative person. I think, you know, as one of the things that I did as I was preparing to run for city councils, I reached out to about 24 people who know me really, really well. And I asked them, what are 3 words to describe who I am and how I work? And the 2 words that came up most frequently were collaborative and pragmatic. And I think that's pretty apropos for how I'm going to approach the work. You know, my history in the last 4 years being on the OPPD board has really helped me understand what is really necessary to move the ball forward. And sometimes, you know, like I think the climate crisis is one of the more important things that we as humans need to address as soon as humanly possible. However, there are people that I'm working with who aren't there yet. They're coming along, but they're not there yet. So in order to make some progress, I mean, for me, one of the key indicators that I think tells the story of how we make progress, even though what we do today is not what we want, but maybe it'll be there in 6 months, a year, or so on. When I joined the board, our goal for renewable energy was 10% by 2020, I believe. We're at 40% now. We set a new goal that was just kind of a mediocre goal to improve or to decrease how much carbon emissions came from a kilowatt hour. So to push emissions down, but nothing meaningful. was a step in the right direction. And now a year or so later, we've set a goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. That's still not aggressive enough. I'll fully admit that, but we're making really good progress, and the trajectory is right, and we're getting things done. So I do think that collaboration is important. It's not easy, right? Like, there's no question there are people that I disagree with, that we just have to sit down at a table and try and figure out whether or not there's a path forward. And sometimes there's not. And that's going to be okay. But sitting down at the table is really the first step. And key before that is building a relationship and creating that trust so that we can in fact have that conversation. If that's not there, if there's not a common goal around or consensus around we need to be better as a city in whatever ways we decide, then that conversation is never going to happen. So it's hard work. I mean, it is time consuming, but it is absolutely critical in order for us to make any progress.
Thank you, Craig. Cammy, what do you think?
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor this too long, but I think it's a mix of both Mark and Craig. Depending on who our mayor is, and we have to remember the mayor is up for election in this as well. So depending on who our mayor is, partnership looks different. That partnership, but partnership is going to have to be a part of this regardless. So my hope, and yes, hope is my strategy right now, is that we will have a mayor that shares my vision of Omaha. And in that, then that means I am preparing to follow the lead of that mayor, and that we can work together as a council and a mayor, knowing that we have a strong mayoral system in this city. And it was same as Craig. I reached out to a lot of people starting out to this because I wanted to have a better sense of the lay of the land of what we're walking into and how it works currently. And the current partnership system is where we're having to drag the mayor along on issues. I don't want to have to do that, but if that's what we have to do, then that does mean the same as Destiny and Sarah mentioned, that the partnership has to be here with all of us in the city council. And I think essentially the partnership of all of us working together looks exactly like this. Like, I 100% intend to govern the same way that I run my campaign, which is through collaboration, which is through like partnership, so that we know that we're each bringing different things to this. And if we can figure out where those common threads are for us to kind of pull along those people who are not with us on this, then that's what we have to do.
Thank you. Destiny.
So this is where I think that my background is a valuable asset to this, where I already know how to work to represent the voices and needs of those that I'm currently representing as a labor leader. And I will take that same background and apply it to the needs and voices that I am hearing from my district, and then work with the other leaders, rather city council, mayor, and other elected officials throughout our state as needed to say, what are you hearing? What does your district need? Do you think that this is a great project for your district? Will it advance and energize what your district needs right now in 10, 20, 40 years into the future as well?
All right, thank you. Talking about some changes and moving forward, knowing that our transportation is an issue of equity, what changes would you like to make to improve Omaha's poorly functioning transportation system? Any models that maybe we could replicate or follow? Who would like to start on this? Mark?
Thank you. One of the first things I'll say that is an easy thing that we could do very quickly, probably, when the pandemic first started, the Metro bus system here in Omaha made the decision to rework its budget around and make it so that it was free to ride the buses. You didn't have to pay to ride the bus anywhere. And they were on reduced hours at first, but they kept the free fare for a while, and now they're back to having a fare. When you go to Metro people on the board and whatever, they'll tell you it's only $15-20 million that comes in revenue from people giving money to ride the bus. Now that they have an increased tax authority given after Justin Wayne's bill in the legislature a couple of sessions ago, it would be a simple small tax raise across the whole county, and buses could be free to ride. There are a lot of simple things like that we can do, but just starting off as public transit goes, I believe that all public transit should be free to use. In 2001, the city council passed a resolution to build some kind of rail system along Dodge Street. which I hope would have gone from Council Bluffs to Elkhorn, and maybe even to Valley or Fremont, but the mayor vetoed it and they didn't overcome the veto. That's right around the same time that Denver, Colorado was starting its light rail program in its city. Now they have over 10 light rail lines across the city of Denver. And I really feel like we are way behind and we need to prioritize rail transit as well as mass transit through buses. I also want to say I presented a couple plans during my last campaign for legislature I made, including one that I'll highlight specifically, the Blackstone Bike Path, which would be an extension of the Field Club Bike Trail from 39th and Leavenworth north along the 39th Street corridor into Blackstone, all the way through Blackstone and across Dodge Street at 39th Street, connecting to the bike share lanes up on North 40th Street, creating a nice north-south connection with 2 pedestrian bridges over Dodge Street and Leavenworth to connect Blackstone with all the neighborhoods around there, make it a little bit more accessible. I also don't own a car and I ride my bicycle everywhere. So just as a matter of framing, I'm just a worker working and riding my bike around. I'm living a different life and I'll be a different kind of candidate.
I want to piggyback on that so from Mark's perspective, if possible, so I see some of the biggest barriers that we have to really creating a truly equitable transportation in the city is on the state level. So legislative bills, one in particular that stands out to me is LB 492, where right now which is to create a regional metropolitan authority. So exactly to kind of what Mark was talking about, where we're no longer just siloing city to city, but we're creating transportation plans or mobility plans that can cross our entire metro region so that we're taking a more holistic practice on this. So that's absolutely necessary. An example of a city that I think is doing a good job is Indianapolis. They have a system called the Red Line. Let me find my notes on it. Yeah, it's the Red Line bus service. So it currently covers like 13 miles. They do have a fee for it, but a quarter-mile stretch of this reaches 150,000 jobs in their community. And right now, where the people that need to ride, which in Omaha, like 6% of our population are exactly like Mark. They don't have access or do not drive vehicles and they need to utilize the public transportation. 13% of those people are people of color. And so where the majority of the folks are living is not where our jobs are. So we need transit that's not only serving the areas that need it, but also connecting us to the opportunities for jobs. But I think in doing that, we also have to be realistic and talk about the way that our city and urban sprawl is happening, where lower income people are being moved northwest and our bus system is not meeting, or even just our transit system and our way about mobility is meeting the needs of today and where people are living. And I really think the second biggest barrier that we have is us as individuals that live in this city. Our entire city is continuously built around this idea that you have to have a car to get around, and we need to break that. And that's more about individual behavior change and individual views about transportation. And I was just introduced to the concept from my friend Manny about mobility justice. And there's a book called Mobility Justice by Mimi Schaefer that I think all of us should read and really start to take in concept, because it's all about this idea of equalizing or addressing movement from the perspective of inequality and equitable access to movement and what that looks like. And it changes throughout our states of our community, but it's about freedom of choice in that, and knowing that the most marginalized often don't have as much choice about their mobility.
Thank you, Jonathan. What do you think?
One thing that Cammy definitely hit on was the need of the lower income residents to be able to get transportation back and forth from their residence to their place of employment. Creating jobs is something that has been talked about and on platforms for elected officials in this area for the last few years. So one of the things that I'm definitely working on, and I think it was mentioned earlier, was trying to create a budget specifically for each district or certain areas, so that way we can start implementing change and getting things done within your area. So with that budget, what I would do is I would empower some of these nonprofit organizations to we can get them grant funding so that way they can start building transportation models. So that way, you know, if they meet on 30th and Ames or 30th and Lake in a parking lot, then one of these organizations can get these residents back and forth to work or their jobs where they need to be. So if we can start using grant funding, and not even the nonprofits, but if we can start getting private businesses that want to start building shuttle services, and we can accommodate them financially and within means of, you know, emissions and greenhouse and, you know, those type of situations, if we can make some type of fleet that our residents back and forth from work outside of the MAT system, then I think that would help at all, just based on, like I said, when Mark said MAT went on limited hours, it kind of hindered the residents of our district if they would have needed to work outside of those hours that MAT was operating. So I do definitely believe that we have to work with the state level and start working with Metro Area Transit to make a regional plan, but we also have to work on being sustainable within our own areas to get our residents or to get the individuals that don't have access to public transportation back and forth as well.
Thank you. Sarah, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on transportation.
Thanks. I'd like to talk about, just really quick, kind of going off of something Cammy said, when it comes to like the jobs that are further away from our homes, therefore we need a car to get to those jobs. An idea I came across a few weeks ago was the idea of the 15-minute neighborhood. Basically where everything that is essential to your life, you know, your job, your, you know, place to get groceries, libraries, post office, all of those things are within a 15-minute walk of a residency, and sort of just like creating like a, what do they call it? Like a intensified version of a city within a city. And I think it's a great idea because then it would eliminate the need for a lot of people to even own a car, which can be a huge, huge drain on resources. And then when they did need to go somewhere further away, that would increase a higher demand for busing or for the rail transit or biking even. And so I think that's something we could look at. And from my reading, it seems that you sort of just kind of look at where you're at and kind of let them happen organically, promote businesses like cropping up their small grocery stores and things like that in the neighborhoods that we have. And then with that, also, I think that would force us to improve the walkability of our city. One of my best friend also lives in my district, and she lives just like a block off of L Street. And she's like, the sidewalks in my neighborhood, I cannot walk on them. She's got small kids, so she wants to, you know, put them in the stroller and take them out. And she can't because the sidewalks just, they're not smooth. They're very narrow. Even walking, like a lot of us have been walking because of the pandemic. And we've noticed that if you're trying to walk with more than one other person, there's just not enough space on the sidewalk. And that's a problem. Especially if we're trying to promote people just walking and biking more. If there's not space for them to do it, they're not going to do it. So I think those are, and a few other cities that are looking at or are doing it, like Detroit or Boulder, are looking at those 15-minute neighborhoods, which I think are great ideas. But yeah, it should be easy to move about without a car in the city. And there's a few things we can do about that. So make sure that was everything. And then I think, again, for us as city leaders, I think it's important that we set an example by riding public transportation when we can, or walking or biking, whatever's going on, just making those personal decisions, like Cammy said, to sort of lead the way and show that, hey, riding the bus isn't that bad. Riding your bike is good for you. Like, let's just for the habit of using our cars so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Craig or Destiny, I'd love to get one of you guys, and then we'll move on to our next question.
Yeah, I think that looking at Kansas City, a lot of my friends have obviously gone there quite a lot, and they have the trolley system that runs about 2 miles. I think that that's something that we could utilize downtown, especially as we get large events with CWS, the Olympic swim trials, and other event venues happening all at the same time. It could really facilitate getting patrons from restaurants and bars to those venues. So that is something that we definitely, and I would like to also extend that north and south of the downtown area to be able to get the residents of those areas that maybe don't have cars and maybe can't afford the bus system to be able to provide the free trolley system.
Thank you. Craig, a quick comment from you.
Yep, I'll be quick because I think a lot of people have made some really great points already. this is an issue that you can't decouple from land use. Density is absolutely critical for us to have a transportation system, and a transit system in particular, that is financially feasible, that works. I mean, it's about people, it's about rooftops, it's about creating those walkable environments that many of you have talked about. And without density, we should continue to pursue it. And that's the other thing that I would say is that this is one of the places where I'm pretty hopeful. Orbit's going to start running here in a couple of weeks, which has been a 5-year slog to get it going. I've been the chair of the stakeholder committee, and that has been an interesting exercise to see how Metro works with the city. There's an opportunity for improvement there. I'm also hopeful because the chamber is really actually paying attention to transportation and transit issues in a way that they'd never have before. It's this access to jobs issue that I think Mark talked about earlier. So we've got some really good things going on, but it is the way that our city is structured today. It's a de facto tax for many people. Like the way in which some people really kind of want to and need to live their lives. They're sort of forced to own a car in many cases. The people that move here who didn't have a car when they lived in Boston or New York, who have to buy one, it's a de facto tax in many ways. So we can do a much, much better.
All right, thank you. Mark, we'll have to move on to our next question. We'll have some question and answer later, so maybe someone will bring this back up. But I'd like to get everybody's answer on this. What differentiates you from your incumbent in your seat now? So we can start with just Sarah.
Okay. So if I could sum it up into one word, it would be accessibility. I got into this race because they tell you the first thing to do when you see something that you're dissatisfied with in your local government or national government, they tell you to write to your elected representatives. And so over the summer when we had a crazy summer, and when the protests downtown started to get a lot of attention and were starting to become a thing, I wrote to my representative to ask what their plan was, and I got silence. I got no response, and until somebody sort of forced one about 2 weeks later out of him. And so I started researching, what does city council do? In particular, what is Vinnie Palermo doing? And I didn't find much. I looked on social medias and things like that, and they were very quiet. He rarely, if ever, posts something that's his own thoughts. It's usually a retweet of some business in Omaha or the PACE program. Things that are not found, businesses not found in District 4. And so basically he's hard to get a hold of, and he's not telling anybody much of what's going on. And so to combat that, the way I would be different is I want to be so accessible that it's annoying. Just how much I want to garner feedback from my constituents, just constantly, hey, what do you think about this? Hey, do you need this? Hey, can I help you with this? I just want them to be sick of me, essentially, because I'm too available. And that just means, we're constantly getting feedback, attending, neighborhood meetings, and being present at community events and informing people, hey, here's what city council is doing. This is what this means. Here's how you can help. Here's how you can get involved. And just kind of constantly putting myself out there so people can, and then just, social media is the easiest way that we can keep people informed of what we're doing. And if anybody's not using it actively, it's kind of a wasted opportunity to involve people. And it does say a lot about how much criticism you're willing to take and how much input you're willing to take. So that is my goal. My goal is to make government more accessible for my citizens, my constituents, and giving them the power to make change in Omaha.
Okay, great. Thank you. Destiny.
I've only ever been a registered voter in District 5, and I believe that Councilman Pauls has been the councilman the entire time I've been registered as a voter. And much like Sarah, he has not made himself accessible to myself, and I have to assume many other constituents within District 5 have to have the same response or lack thereof. So definitely making myself available to my constituents and making myself available by being out there in the community and creating, neighborhood cleanup days or days where we plant trees, and getting other community leaders involved, whether it is from the legislative districts that are nearby or possibly in that particular part of the district, or other city council members saying, hey, come meet my district so that we can all work together better and they can fully understand you and why we vote the way that we do sometimes. And that way you have a personal connection to your leaders.
Thank you, Destiny. Jonathan, Lathan, your incumbent, Ben Gray, how would you differentiate yourself from him?
All right, so I can honestly say that, the other two candidates that just spoke, they haven't been able to get in contact with their council person, and that accessibility is something that I actually have not experienced with Ben Gray. When I decided to run, I was able to go to the city council meeting, meet him, and we've been working on the strategies to help build the district. And so he's done a lot for District 2 in the past, and I won't negate the things that he's done, but I don't think he's gone far enough with some of his policies. So we talked about the Omaha Land Bank. I said I would want to take that Omaha Land Bank and those properties that are being bought, as I mentioned earlier, let's make sure that some residents of the district can get those houses and make sure that we stop the education that's been going on in the area. With the landlord registry, we got to expand that. I know that he just mentioned one of the apartment complexes off of 48th Street. There was a news article on that about a month ago about the living conditions of them. So he called the news crew, and then all of a sudden there was a big fuss about it. I would have established a relationship with the media or with the residents prior to, having to make it that large of an issue, because once eyes are on something, then it's a problem, but it should be solved before it gets to that point. I know he put a good neighbor ordinance into place, which is stopping a lot of the bad liquor licenses or the problem establishments that are down here in North Omaha, but I want to expand that also to these abandoned and substandard buildings that are in our district as well. If you drive down 4th Street, you see so many boarded up and buildings that just aren't up to code. So I want to expand that good neighbor ordinance to, like Mark said earlier, I think the city needs to be able to acquire those buildings if they don't get them up to code or give this a plan on how they're going to improve that over the next couple of years. And then also small and emerging business program that I know he's worked on, specifically as far as snow removal is concerned down here and a couple other things. Let's start getting more contractors to clean our roads. Let's start getting more contractors to repair and fix our streets. Somebody had mentioned earlier the sidewalks. If we can take that small and emerging business program that's been trying to get put in place for the last couple of years down in our district and use it to enhance our district on that aspect, I think that would be something that I do differently. So I take things a little bit further than he's gone as far as getting those programs that he's put in place working for the entire district and not just, letting them kind of fall by the wayside.
Thank you, Jonathan. Craig Moody.
Well, we don't have an incumbent in our race. So I'll just talk a little bit about, kind of how I'm going to approach the work. I do think that, these roles are extraordinarily important to people, right? Because these are the day-to-day things that people experience day in and day out that perhaps, our presidential election won't affect them tomorrow, but the streets that they drive on, the way in which they get rid of their waste is something that affects people every single day. And so, my experience over the years has really allowed me to better understand exactly what that really looks like for people in a variety of different ways and facets. And I've tried to sort of, bridge this gap and have a foot in both camps, both meaning sort of an activist role that I had in the community, walking around with a megaphone in my hands for a few years, causing trouble, but now in a slightly different role as an elected official. I have an appreciation and understanding for how both of those roles are extraordinarily important to being a successful city council representative. So that's in many ways kind of how I'll approach the work. My personal mission is to catalyze systemic change for the better. So I'm not interested in, just kind of moderate change here and there. I'm looking for real systemic opportunities to make the city better, to make it, a place that's going to accelerate coming out of this pandemic. And I think that's a true opportunity that we have. we are, as we come out of this, everything has been shaken to its core. And as we come out of it, we have a true opportunity to really rethink the entire society that we've created and create something that's better. If we don't, we're going to lose that opportunity, and we're going to fall behind a lot of the other cities that were already doing a lot of those things to begin with and are perhaps taking some meaningful steps forward. So this is a space that I'm comfortable, and this is the way that I'll approach the work, is really kind of looking at systems change to really think about where our city needs to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Thank you, Craig. Cammy, you're in this same district as Craig. So how would you approach the work?
First, I want to say what differentiates me is that I'm Black and a woman. I think that's will be the first time ever in this district that we would have somebody hold that seat. So besides the obvious, that I think I point that out because there are different lenses in which we approach problems. And so while we hold similar values, I hold similar values to Craig and Mark and anyone else that's running in this role. Those lenses impact how I look at problems and possible solutions. And I have the ability to look at them not only as a person who studied it from kind of that 100-foot view, but also as a person who's lived these experiences. I know what it's like to grow up in Omaha Housing Authority or OHA affordable housing, because that's my lived experience. I know what it's like to count every penny and to play that like bill juggling game when you're not answering the phone because you know it's a creditor and you can't pay that bill right now, having to hold multiple jobs, even as a salary full-time employee somewhere because you're not being paid an adequate enough wage to that one full-time job covers your cost of living. And if an financial emergency comes up, you're screwed. I know what it's like to be up till 1 a.m. in the morning with a family member going through a mental health crisis, and the lack of resources available to families and individuals in this city around mental health and mental illness. So like each and every single one of those experiences shapes how I look at these problems and also the solutions because I've lived within them. And I know that I am not going to have all the answers of how to solve it by studying and reading books, but I know that that's a part of it. But I also need to bring in the folks that are currently experiencing that. So I, by no means, pretend to be a person that knows all the answers, but I absolutely have a starting point of where I can go to find people to help me get those answers. And that's 100% of what I want to do in this role, is to use my experience to know how to broaden those lenses. Like I think the lens of the folks that typically are in this space or in this seat, in this role, it's been about here, and I'm a little bit more on the peripheries of those individuals. And so that will help me in bringing forth a different path and bringing in people that probably weren't typically engaged in this district.
Thank you, Cammy. Mark?
I am so glad this question was asked. I think this is an excellent question. Lots of debates have really dumb questions sometimes, but this is a really good question. And I know that Chris Jerem is not, I'm not running against Chris Jerem. He's not the incumbent, but I think it's important that we talk about Chris Jerem's record and politicians like Chris Jerem. In 2012, I voted for the first time for President Obama, and I saw Chris Jerem at the caucusing location, and I shook his hand and I said, Chris, thank you for voting for the Equal Employment Ordinance to protect queer people from employment discrimination in the city of Omaha. And that was a nice conversation. I moved on from there. And then last year, I got up in front of the city council and I spoke against a grant that was going to be given to the Salvation Army from the city of Omaha, because the Salvation Army has a questionable record about how they treat queer people, specifically transgender people who come in to receive their services. And Chris Jerem sort of poo-pooed my statements afterwards, and he said, well, we already have an ordinance about that, so we don't have to worry about that. But the ordinance is about employment discrimination, not about the type of discrimination someone who comes to the Salvation Army would receive from the Salvation Army if they did discriminate. And so it showed me that Chris Jerem didn't really think the issue all the way through, and he didn't care to. I also have heard Chris Jerem say things about gentrification, and I've heard developers use gentrification the same way. They've referred to it as a positive thing, as though what has happened along Park Avenue and along Leavenworth Street and in Blackstone is a net good thing, even for the people who were displaced by that economic activity. Gentrification is an academic term about something that is bad. You cannot paint gentrification in a good light. If gentrification is happening, there's a problem and something needs to change. Chris Jerem kicked me out of a city council meeting once for trying to bring up his statements about gentrification. And I want to just show everybody here a couple pictures real quick. This is a house in Midtown Omaha. And if you notice the stairs on the house, they've been redone very nicely recently. And then this is a picture of the same building of the family who was evicted from the house when it was purchased by, I don't remember the name of the developer right now, but the company removed the stairs from the house as a part of the renovation before the family could move out of the house. And that's the type of development that's going on in Midtown Omaha right now. This is just a couple blocks from Park Avenue, a block off of Park Avenue. And Chris Jerem kicked me out of a city council meeting for trying to talk about this kind of development. Chris Jerem has taken over $50,000 from real estate developers in the last election cycle. And it's imperative that we not elect someone like Chris Jerem, who's going to cozy up to developers, who's going to insist that we make friends with people who are obviously our enemies, not just our opponents, but our enemies. And that's why I'm running, because I'm a worker. I'm going to put workers first, poor and working class people. I'm not going to make friends with entrepreneurs and investors and business owners and homeowners associations. I'm going to put workers first, and that's the kind of city councilor I'll be. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll move on to our last and final question before we get to the yes or no's. In this time of racial injustice, how will you use your office to move towards equity and unity? We'll just go around again, starting with Sarah.
So this is a pretty heavy question because it has a lot of heavy consequences. I think as a white person, I don't have the same experience as the Black and Brown community. And I think to try to speak to that with any kind of authority would be insulting. But I do recognize that there is a problem with systemic racism in this country, in this city, all over, and it needs to be addressed. So I think as my role on city council would be to listen to the experiences of Black and Brown community members, especially in South Omaha. You know, we have a pretty heavy immigrant population. It's very diverse, and to act like I was the authority on that subject would be ridiculous. So it would be a matter of just listening to those experiences and elevating those voices, and hearing what they need and what they want, and again, elevating that and connecting it with other people. And also listening to the experiences of the other people on council and the other people in leadership, and just sort of supporting what they are doing and their initiatives and goals, and just being a bridge and speaking in a way that builds up those voices and is part of the change without focusing that on my experience.
Thank you, Sarah. Destiny?
Like Sarah said, it is, once again, as a white woman, I cannot speak on behalf of BIPOC folks, but I can listen to them and whenever possible, give them a voice at the table. I can speak on behalf of, women being marginalized, LGBTQ plus folks being marginalized, because I do have that. So just elevating the voices that need to be elevated at that time and knowing who talk to at those times, rather it is other elected officials, which will hopefully add more diversity to our city council and to potentially mayor and other, even in the legislature, talking with them, because often those seats as well have a lot of voices talking to them about what their needs are. And so connecting with them really helps on the city level too, in my opinion.
Thank you, Destiny. Jonathan, Lathan.
So the biggest thing that I would do as far as equity and unity in my district specifically is I would empower our residents to get their own, basically. So nobody's gonna magically come down and say District 2, we've got to learn to build it ourselves from the inside out. So what that does, that starts with jobs. So jobs and housing, basically. But with the jobs, I want to push for trades. I want to bring back CETA, which was the Comprehensive Employment and Training Agency, where we can start getting skilled laborers from, right out of high school, 18, all the way through. So that way they get those apprenticeships and they start making those wages. I think Cammy mentioned earlier about the minimum wage disparity that was going on. And if we can get more wages and we can get our residents making more income, that also helps improve that quality of living that we have with the equity and justice. Education, I know we've all heard it a million times, nobody can take your education away from you once you get it. So if we can start, moving people towards getting higher education, even if they're not doing the trades, if we can start changing the standardized testing disparities. I know Sarah is a teacher, so we can change the standardized testing, or we can start doing the grading standards, not based on testing, but if we can find some other form of aptitude to get our students to start building that on them down in our district, I think that would help with the equity and the justice that we have down here. And then also just building unity, working with the other communities, the LGBTQ, any other entity that is going to have to use that partnership. I want to use my position to bridge those gaps. It doesn't matter what race, gender, orientation, ethnicity you are. We all have the same common goals, which is to make our future better for our families, for ourselves, and for our children. So I would definitely use my platform to facilitate and bridge that gap that some may have in those specific areas.
Thank you, Jonathan. Craig, your thoughts?
Well, if I've learned anything, in the last several years, I mean, one of the things, I'm extraordinarily privileged, and Cammy's team and Inclusive Communities have taken me through a few exercises over the last several weeks where that is made abundantly clear to me. So I have an important but different role to play as we think about this, and it very much aligns with what Sarah and Destiny said. I need to listen and learn first, and then act. White men have been in power for a very long time, and so it's very much something that is on my mind in terms of what my role is at this particular moment in time. I do think that our government plays an important role in helping us give people accessibility, right? So like that at the very least starts with our local government operating in a way that anyone can access it, that can engage in its processes, can influence its outcomes. And so I think that's something that's really important that we think about as a city is how do we elevate our processes so that everyone has access and those barriers essentially wash away so that people can get in and get the city services they need, and as council members can influence the direction that we're taking the city. And the city can do some very deliberate and distinct things in terms of how it can affect change as well, whether it's incorporating racial equity into the criteria of all of its, the city's master plan, and all the elements of that city master plan is sort of a basic starting block as far as I'm concerned. And I also, there are many cities that have taken some pretty active steps on this, and a lot of them are passing ordinances that contemplate a variety of different things, whether it's creating a Department of Race and Equity, setting aside a racial equity plan that sort of aligns with the planning effort that I talked about earlier, ensuring that the right training and capacity building through city staff is incorporating racial equity decision-making into the contracts that are awarded and into budgeting decisions and hiring decisions and all of the development decisions we've talked about, transportation. I mean, this issue threads through everything. And so it really has to become part of the criteria for how we make for how we make every single decision. And that's really the only way, that's one of the key ways that I think is going to be critical for us to make some meaningful progress on this.
Thank you, Craig. Cammy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I want to call our city into accountability around the way we talk about race and the way we view it. I want us to be more cognizant of the diaspora of people of color in our community and recognize that we're not just a monolith, and that to assume certain areas in the segregation that was created and manufactured in our city intentionally does not define the communities of color that live here. We have to stop viewing that only people of color live in certain areas of our city and making it we're only going to address this area here and not this area here, and ignore all the rest of us that live everywhere. There's a certain amount of targeted support for the least oppressed and underserved in our community, but we also have to be cognizant of that we are a full part of this community. And in doing so, the plans that we put in place have to be cognizant of that. And whether or not I win this race, for me, this has been more so about we have to have a movement, not just a campaign. And similar to kind of what we saw Stacey Abrams do in Georgia, where she paved the way for the people coming up behind her. And that's what I hope to do, whether in office or whether I get just close to it. Like I cannot afford to make this movement and then stop and not make sure that I'm paving a way for the next individuals of color that live in other areas than District 2 and District 4 to run for office. And so that said, of how I'm bringing people along, one of the main things that I think I want to put in place, and I'm making a mission once in office, is that I really, really want Omaha to have a participatory budgeting process. And I want to pave the way and make the path for that to happen during my time. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I don't know, but I do know it'll be a heavy lift. And I know that we have plenty of blueprints and examples all across the country and the world in which this is working for us to build off of. Budgets are absolutely a moral document, and I've said that before. And so I think we have to invest in our community, in them having an opportunity to talk about or know or understand or be part of the decision-making process for where those city dollars are budgeted, because it's so important to our lives. As we've learned and talked about, these local elections be so important to us every single day.
Thank you, Cammy. Mark, your thoughts?
Thank you. So the question is, how would I use the office to promote, to move towards equity and unity? And this is another really good question I'm glad was asked. As a socialist, I don't believe that unity is achieved by simply asking your opponents or your enemies, are you ready to play nice now? I believe that unity and progress are achieved through concerted, principled struggle. And that might be in the form of an argument, it might be in the form of just a back and forth ideas, but we have to engage in a struggle in order to forge unity together. And if there's no struggle, you're not going to get unity. First of all, I want to say that as a white person, it's not my job to tell Black people in any community to how to overcome the oppression that they find themselves in right now. That's not my job. My job as a white person in a position of power is to speak to other white people. I've got my copy of Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail here. There's a couple parts in this that really inform my philosophy when it comes to this, and that's the parts about the white moderate and the negative peace. White moderates are people who don't really want to engage in that struggle. They just want to create a new negative peace where we all just say, we're good now, right? Let's just sweep it under the rug and just not talk about it. And everything seems fine. We go back to normal for now, but the problem hasn't been addressed because we didn't engage in principled struggle about it. So my job as a white person in a position of power is to become a thorn in the side of white people who are the problem. And first of all, like I said, I need to look inward, look in the mirror and address my own biases and prejudices, because I absolutely have those as a white person, as a privileged white man. Even though I'm gay, I definitely am extremely privileged, just like Craig. And I just, after you've addressed your own, after you started to address your own privileges and biases, then it's your job to go to other white people and to do the labor of deconstructing white supremacy yourself so that that doesn't fall onto people and communities of color. So that's how I would use the office if I got elected. I would engage in principled struggle with my opponents and my enemies, other white people who are the problem, in order to forge real progress and real unity.
Thank you, Mark. So we talked about a lot of subjects today. We're going to move on to our yes and no portion. I encourage you guys to use your raise your hand feature on Zoom, just so we have an account of your answers. But I'll just start with the first question. And everyone knows how to use that, right? The raise your hand feature. Thumbs up. Okay.
No, it does not.
Okay.
Just do up and down.
Maybe.
Yeah, we'll just do thumb up and down.
We'll just do thumbs up, thumbs down. How about that? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. Does that work? Thumbs up if that works. Okay, perfect. Awesome. Okay, so we'll jump right into the first question. It's, do you support defunding the police? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no.
Oh,
No, Kim.
you got it. Oh, wait, is this down? I don't see it.
Jonathan, no answer? Okay, thumbs down. Okay. In transportation, equity, and mobility justice is your top three priority, in your top three priority issues, sorry. So let me read that again. Is transportation, equity, and mobility justice in your top three priority issues? Okay, number 2 for Mark. All right, so the next question, are affordable housing and just urban development in your top 5 priorities? All right, thank you. Do you support a mask mandate? Thank you. Would you support affirmative action? Thank you. Do you believe climate change is an immediate threat to Omaha and America? Thanks. Should recreational marijuana be legalized? Okay. Does Omaha currently address mental health needs adequately? Do you support implementing anti-racist policies? All right, thank you for all your answers.
Questions from the chat.
And we have a few questions from the community. Dewan's gonna grab those for us right now.
Yes, I'll just ask them.
Okay. Dewan's gonna take over this part. Thank you, guys.
No, sorry. Hey there, y'all. So we have a question specifically about climate change. Can you explain the difference between carbon neutral as opposed to zero emissions? And then what would you do to work within City Council to address climate change? So it's one about, I think one was specifically about Craig with carbon neutral and zero emissions. And then for the whole group, what would you do to address climate change with the City Council?
So I'll stop from my perspective on that definition. That's a great question. I work in this space and everybody has different definitions. So carbon neutrality is really still allows for some emissions to occur, but for offsets to happen so that you're essentially netting out those emissions, right? So in other words, if you think about a city may still not get rid of all emissions altogether. There may still be some natural gas burned and some cars that are spewing emissions, so that you're still sort of doing the negative things, but you purchase offsets. Maybe it's a wind farm in Western Nebraska and getting those credits so that you can get yourself down and sort of offset those things. So that's the difference between carbon neutrality. It really allows for that, which is different from zero emissions, which means they entirely go away. Lots to do for the city of Omaha in this space. We have largely, as a city, abandoned any work on this, and it's really, quite honestly, offensive, the way in which things were happening over 8 years ago, and it's just completely gone by the wayside. Similar to some of the other issues we talked about, this is the topic that threads through everything else, right? So the density that we talked about, the transportation that we talked about, housing, it's something that's relevant to all of those. And I said this before, but I'll say it again, like we need a strategy and a plan as a city for what we can get done here. It is not simple. It affects, I mean, there are plenty of environmental, social justice, and racial justice issues that are intersecting all over the place, right? So like this is one that's extraordinarily complicated, that requires a lot of work on our part as a city to ensure that we're oriented and doing all of the right things. This is, as I said earlier, one of the most important things that we as humanity should be working on. If we think the pandemic has been really terrible, the climate crisis is going to be a slow drip of that until we realize that we're a frog in a boiling pot and it's over. So we got to get busy on this, and there's a lot of work to get done.
Great. Jonathan?
All right, so as far as what I can affect with the climate change in the city of Omaha, I definitely work with the newly elected Terrell McKinney to bring in proposals that I had to the legislature as far as trying to get something implemented within the city where it was since zero emission vehicles, or giving a tax credit to individuals who purchase these types of vehicles and were able to show, how much they drove them as opposed to a vehicle that is normally producing a lot of carbon or those types of functions. Within the city, I think with the transportation level, being able to get a mass transit system as far as the trolley or things like that would also help reduce the carbon emissions as well. So at the city level, I'd definitely be an advocate for some form of transportation that maximized space but minimized use as far as emissions were concerned.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, I definitely think, if we increase public transportation, that'll reduce the amount of cars that are on the road and handing out those emissions. I also want to talk about recycling. Like we have a new recycling contract, and everybody got, like my home was delivered our new bins this week. And I think about, my parents live in Bellevue, and so a few years ago in Bellevue, they began to implement like mandatory recycling. And so they got like a giant bin just for recycling. And some people kind of like kicked and screamed all about it, people who were not in the habit of recycling. But what happened was after a while, they got used to it and now they do it. And it's not that big of a deal. And I think we need to, hopefully, like with the availability of the recycling bins that we just got, people will realize that, it's not so hard to recycle, not a big deal. It's an easy thing to do. But also, I think it is a little disappointing about the limitations of what we are allowed to put in those bins. There's nothing for glass, for example. And so I think we need to up the ease of recycling glass and other things that we can't put into our bins to help just kind of everyone know that, hey, this isn't so hard. We can do it. We can reduce these things. And I think that would just kind of lead to just like a more open and accepting idea about like being more proactive about recycling and reducing our waste.
Thank you. Destiny?
So I think that we need to expand. I know that this is something that has come up quite a bit in the city council, the ability for bike paths and what kind of bikes are available to use those paths, so that we can cut down on driving. And we need to look at something out towards Elkhorn area of the district, where how many folks are driving on Dodge Street every day to commute downtown or to 90th and Dodge area that live out in Elkhorn, where we could instead implement a light rail system and have them park for free every day and take that, especially those that work regular hours where we know they are working 8 a.m. to 5 or 6 p.m. every Monday through Friday, and also offer longer hours, because gig workers, how many of us are gig workers and we're working at the bars until 2 a.m. and then after that for cleanup for closing time. And right now the city does not make that accessible to us. Those of us that have to park downtown, we can't park in the parking garages because they close. And the ones that don't close at that time are, 10, 20 blocks away from where we're working.
Thank you, Destiny. Cammy, would you like to respond to this question, particularly about climate change and with City Council?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things back when in my Sierra Club days, when I was there, that we were advocating for was this movement. It was essentially tied to the Kyoto Protocol that was in place, and that was back in 2006 when Bush was in office, and our country was not taking the lead around climate change. And so we decided to bring together mayors and governors, and recognizing that they have more autonomy and the ability to solve these problems on a city level. And so we were really pushing for the cool cities signatories, and Omaha was one of those cities that signed on to that, as well was Lincoln, I believe Hastings, and we even saw Council Bluffs do the same. And similar to what Craig talked about, we have gone backwards. In our city, there was a city manager that was responsible for addressing energy efficiency and climate change in our city government, and that doesn't exist. So one of the things I would love to see us do is invest back into having a mayor's office staff person dedicated to addressing climate change, because there's not a one size fits all. There's not a simple, there's simple solutions around in the cities that maintained, Seattle and all the others that maintained the commitments and the promises that they made in 2006 to address climate change. We're seeing the impacts of that with investments in green roofs, the way that we do our development, the same way that I see the way that we invest in equity and inclusion in our cities, we have to do the same with sustainability. It's the main reason I don't have a platform specifically tied to sustainability, because we need to be addressing environmental, climate change, sustainability in everything that we do, not just, again, making this side thing that I work on. It's infused into everything. So that would be one of the things I want us to get back to, our commitments that we made in the Cool Cities Agreement back in 2006. And Lord knows it's been, 14 years since then. Think of where we could be if we had continued on that path, but we shifted, and that keeps happening. The recycling is all of a part of it, but it's not just recycling. Like, the phrase is reduce, reuse, recycle, and we need to get to where we're reducing and changing our relationship with waste in this city.
Mark.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's a lot of different things the city council could do to address climate change. There's, as far as even things that sound radical, but are really just have been turned into talking points by the right, things like putting solar panels on every roof. That's a smart way to make a power grid more flexible. If every major building, every new house has a solar panel or a few solar panels on the roof, it's a lot harder for people to lose power, for power to go out. We're all more secure when we have more spread out power sources like renewable energy sources, I believe. But I want to bring climate change back to transportation. Transportation is one of the biggest chunks of the pie that we have to address if we're going to be successful as far as addressing climate change goes. We have to create a world where most people don't need a car in order to get to work. I'll work really hard to I'm very interested in bringing rail projects to Omaha. We've got to start getting something done as far as light rail projects. But also, I ride my bike everywhere. I sold my car 5 years ago and I've been riding my bike. I have so many plans for bike paths all over the city. And I know it's not all about what I believe. I have to go and be a partner with everyone else at city council, but we need someone on the city council who is so excited about transportation that it hurts. And that's how excited I am about transportation and making that future a reality for workers all across the city. So that's what I want to bring it back to, is I think we need to radically transform Omaha as far as transit goes. We need bike and pedestrian infrastructure all over the place. There's things we can do now, but we need long-term big infrastructure projects as well. And that's what I'll focus on as a city councilor.
Thank you. This question is about participatory budgeting. Cammy brought it up earlier. Could you briefly explain participatory budgeting? And then the rest of the candidates, if you could expand upon that or contribute what you think the benefit of participatory budgeting or the deficit would be for the city of Omaha.
Yeah, so the majority of what I understand and know about participatory budgeting, I learned from looking at the way that New York City does their housing authority budgeting system, where and in many cities, there's a certain percentage of the budget that is parsed out for the residents of the city to decide where those dollars go. And that's essentially what we're looking at, is that we're not saying that the entire budget for the city of Omaha is to be decided by the people, but that there's a certain percentage of our city budget that is decided to say, we know that there are projects that need to be done that are things that are important for our community. Let's let our community decide how to do that. And it's several weeks of a process. Boards, like there's various groups that are selected. It's very similar to the way that we do kind of engagement for design, where there's community meetings, people are broken into small groups, they get to talk about, they set up lots of ideas. So there's the brainstorming process, similar to how when you set up a strategic planning, but we're doing this around knowing these are the budget items, how much money we have, talk about what our needs are. There's a voting process and the people decide, okay, we narrow it down to our top 5, and then they vote on what's gonna actually happen. So I think we can absolutely do that. There's examples in the city where we do similar, but not to this level. And it's something that we have to get into in this city. Thank you, Liz, for posting that too.
Yes, thank you for sharing. Does anyone else have any feedback or support for participatory budgeting? Craig.
Yeah, I agree, Cammy. I think this is a super interesting idea, and it's something that we should definitely do. I'm interested, however, in completely reshaping the full budgeting process that we have for our city. I mean, right now, the really short version is the mayor puts together the budget, brings it to city council, and the city council is really the only point at which citizens are really intentionally asked, what do you think of our budget? And it's a super short process, and it's pretty well locked in unless the city council representatives have done some work up front to really start to bring people towards the spot. But it does not meaningfully engage citizens, because we're essentially asked at the end, y'all cool with this? And that's about it. So I want to bring citizens in at the very beginning. And in fact, I think, and again, this has been a theme, but I think there's an opportunity for us to really do a holistic, inclusive planning process. Sorry to geek out on the planning, but we need to ask citizens, what are the outcomes we want from our city spending any money? Outcomes-based budgeting is, I think, a really interesting idea for us to explore, because if we start with asking the question, what kind of city do we want to create, and really meaningfully actually engage all people in helping to answer that question, we start with the outcomes that we have in mind, and then that's how we start to figure out how to allocate funding. The process for doing that can get super convoluted and complicated, but ultimately, I really think that an outcomes-based budgeting process is something that we should take a hard look at.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm glad to hear a lot of support for this idea. As Cammy sort of mentioned, right now we have a process where the meetings we go to, basically corporations decide what they're going to do, and then they have a community engagement meeting where they tell us what they're going to do, and then they say they engage with the community. For example, a little bit different than a development plan, but they're planning a bus route between Omaha and Lincoln right now. And they started the meeting off by saying, what options do you want on the bus? And I sort of asked the question. I was like, I wanted to be at the meeting where you asked, do you want a bus or a train? Like, when was that meeting? I wanted to be at that meeting. Someone decided for me that I get a bus. So we definitely need to change the way that we're involving people in the process, for sure.
Great. Jonathan, Sarah, Destiny, do you have any feedback, contributions for that questions?
Yeah, to kind of go off of what Craig was saying about the short turnaround time with the mayor presenting the budget to the city council and then the city council having a public hearing. Prior to 2020, I would often every year try to discuss it, at least for the last 3 or 4 years, with my friends, with my coworkers, with anyone that I could get an audience to, about, well, hey, have you looked at the city budget? What do you think about this? Why should we have the budget be that for this? And try to get any engagement back from just, open dialogue. And very few folks had no clue what I was talking about, because it is such a short turnaround time. We are not involved in the entire process. They basically come to us as a board and say, like it or not. And then the mayor still has veto power if the city council says, well, we don't like this.
Thank you, Sarah.
just to sort of piggyback off of what Destiny said, that document is so difficult to read. The whole, like, the budget is like 475 pages. It is absolutely ridiculous. And the community is brought in at the very end stages of planning. And so one of the things I would like to see in that, and I think that participatory budgeting would help a lot, is like bringing the community in at the beginning of the process and making it accessible. Like, instead of all the financial jargon that's in there, somebody needs to basically decode it and help just like everyday people understand what these terms mean and how it exactly works, so that they can actually like take hold of that and be like, okay, well, I don't want that to work, or I do like this, and have a voice, an informed voice, so that they can cause change in like the early stages of the planning.
Thank you. Jonathan, do you have a comment?
So the participatory budgeting, if we are able to get that enacted, then I feel like it should be a year-long process, at least at a minimum, with all the heads in charge. So I know the last major battle that we had over the budget was the police contract. So when they talked about, oh, we need to move this $2 million from this area to this area, you know, the chief was saying, well, if we take $2 million from here, then you're going to lose services in this area. And then at the end, it came up to we use cash reserves to cover that $2 million for the mental health programs and everything, but then that was still declined as well. So sometimes I think that if we're able to find the root of what exactly is going on, like why did the chief, you know, not want $2 million from the cash reserves? You know, the end result was the same, but there were so many different avenues to get there. So if we can start attacking why everyone feels that their avenue is the best from the beginning, and we can get citizens' feedback and input, it maybe we'll be able to better come to those compromises and those solutions sooner, rather than having a long drawn out process as far as the budget goes. Then I think, like Craig said, it's the turnaround so fast on it where everybody's mind is already made up because it has to be submitted by a certain amount of time, it has to be approved by a certain amount of time. So that doesn't give much room for variation at the rate we're going right now as far as the budget in the city of Omaha is concerned.
Thank you. This question refers actually specifically to the police contract. So what would your brief thoughts be on the proposed OPD contract? A brief testimony of what you would say this Tuesday. So for context, earlier this summer was the discussion about the budget, the city budget that then would determine police funding. Now we're talking specifically about the contract negotiations between the city of Omaha and the Omaha Police Officers Association, which will be a 5-year contract that would go through would go beyond the 4 years of this next term if one of you were elected. And that is to be discussed this upcoming Tuesday. So if you, I'll start with, let's start with Cammy. If you could provide us any kind of feedback or some of your insight on the current proposed contract.
So I'm going to say I have not gotten a hold of the contract. And so I don't want to speak unintelligently without seeing the details of that. But one of the first things that comes to mind for me is that we're signing a 5-year contract with the city when there's this much uncertainty in the way that they're responding and the way we're dealing with us. We've got an active lawsuit against our Omaha City Police and the way in which they handled, and some of the snippets of information about the changes that they're wanting to put in place through this contract or other ways are not necessarily addressing the actual problems that we're seeing. I still have not seen any nods to the recommendations that have come from the gang report or our long time lost city police auditor. I've not seen any increases or looking at how we're even adding in a police auditor into this for oversight, so that we get the data that we need to know how they're actually performing and what community policing means. We don't even have a definition of community policing in our police department. And like, as I talk about, like, I was this on defund because I will be 100% honest, I am not an abolitionist when it comes to the police department. And I want to be really upfront about that. But I do definitely see that we need to invest money in different places where we're getting more into prevention versus response. And that's where we sit right now in the way that we address crime in this city. But I definitely think we need to question as a community, why are we looking at a 5-year contract for a contractor? that we're already in turmoil and having issues and active lawsuits against right now. So I think it's certainly, the term is too long.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Right. So as Cammy was saying, we are negotiating a 5-year contract with the city of Omaha with the police, but to add to that, a 5-year contract where there are raises that are going to the police department every year of that contract. This is where we come to accountability, responsibility, and transparency. What exactly are these raises going for? What exactly are these funds going for? Are we hiring them? Are we giving them raises so we can hire more officers to cover all these areas of the city that are being annexed and aren't getting services like they're supposed to be? Are we giving them more funds so they can have this racial and diversity training that they keep saying they're going to have? Are we giving them more money so that way, I know we just approved $5 million for body cams. And, with that being said, my recommendation, like I said, I've talked to several high officers in the department. I want the body cameras to turn on every time the vehicle goes in park. So, those are the things. So we're going to have to start, if we're going to give the police more money, we have to hold them accountable for the money that we're giving. And that's where I feel that things should come into play as far, like I said, like the participatory budgeting, like having meetings like on Tuesday where people can go speak and say, okay, this is what you want. One thing that I'm particularly concerned about is them making Juneteenth a paid holiday for police. So we're going to pay police to monitor activity that usually occurs in, my area of town. You're going to pay them overtime to police the people who are over policed. And that is kind of troubling to me. So if the city is going to be willing to do that with the police, is it something that they're willing to do for all city workers? So it doesn't just seem like that's what their intent is to over police that specific event or that specific holiday. So that'd be something that I'd definitely be looking forward to. If they really want to show up we're making ethnic changes, then we'll make Juneteenth a pay holiday for all city employees and not just the Omaha Police Department, who is going to get paid overtime to police community events in certain areas.
Thank you, Jonathan. Sarah.
So I too have not had an opportunity to look over the police budget, or the contract. But I do think that having, like Cammy said, having such a long term for that contract, 5 years is a very long time. And that's frightening that they want to sort of lock things in for that amount of time. I'm not a fan of that. And I think especially given their current reputation among the community and their lack of concern over how they're being perceived and how their actions are affecting the community, and then they want to basically lock that in for 5 years, that's not acceptable. And I think we should definitely renegotiate that. And then also just again, the lack of accountability throughout the entire department is just very disturbing. And doesn't appear to be plans for increasing that or for being transparent, especially about even the police funding. I remember Omaha Abolition Research put together a really great presentation over the police budget. But even they just said, as they were dissecting the document, there were certain questions they had that they were unable to find clear answers on. And that, again, that's our taxpayer money that is funding them. And we should know exactly where every single dime and dollar is going.
Thank you. Mark?
Thank you. I'll start off by saying that I am an abolitionist. I think that abolition isn't about just flipping a switch to tomorrow there's no police. Abolition is about slowly defunding over a set period of time. And I believe, and others who are abolitionists also believe, that as we defund the police and redirect that money to other necessities, that the need for police will evaporate and we won't need the institution of police anymore. I was an abolitionist before the Omaha Police Department illegally kettled and took 125 of my friends and I to jail downtown this summer after arresting us in a mass arrest on the bridge at Farnham Street along the interstate. Last summer, Rush Limbaugh and Alex Jones and other right-wing personalities put out this rumor that Antifa was going to start a civil war just out of nowhere. And on a certain day, and on that day, the Omaha Police Department mustered over 30 police officers in full riot gear and SWAT gear to Memorial Park to be ready for the Antifa civil war, I guess. So what I'm getting at is that the Omaha Police Department is a fascist partisan organization that takes outrageous conspiracy theories seriously and takes real threats to democracy, like people with guns going to state capitol buildings or people with guns blocking traffic and harassing people in traffic. They don't pay attention to those problems. So I have completely lost faith in the Omaha Police Department to do their job properly whatsoever. And gives me no pause to call them my enemies. I've distinguished between opponents and enemies in the past. The Omaha Police Department is my enemy, and I will go to City Council and I will work to defund them. Even things like body cameras. When we look at the data surrounding body cameras, 90% of body camera footage that is used in court processes, in actual court cases, is used by the police to prosecute an arrest for someone they arrested, which means that all of the disparities that go along with police behavior are just being bolstered and helped along by technology like body cameras. So all of these different reform issues aren't really even working, and the police have shown that they're completely unaccountable and partisan and politically partisan, and that's why I'm an abolitionist. And I think that abolition is a term that's politicized and everyone's like, oh, that's so extreme. But I think that if we started to slowly defund the police methodically, and if we made partnerships in government to try and do that, if we just tried for a couple of years, let's just start to defund the police, put that money elsewhere. And if we saw a decrease in crime, and if we saw a decrease in the need for police, then we could continue. And I think that's where we can build a bridge as an abolitionist to people who aren't abolitionists to forge some progress on defunding the police.
Great. Destiny and then Craig, and then we will wrap up. We're towards the end of our time.
So I started reading it this morning, or at least the attached version of to this week's City Council agenda, and it is 167 pages long. I am wary of a 5-year contract. I'd rather see a 3-year contract right now. And with a 5-year contract, I'd rather see the rates increase, because they're proposing a 14.5% rate increase over the 5 years. I'd rather see it be 1% the first 2 years, 2% the second or the third and fourth year, and then 2.5% the 5th year, as opposed to what they're presenting, which is 2. Sorry, I just lost my notes on that. But either way, it adds up to 14.5% is what they're proposing. And I'm against that. Once again, 5 years is way too long for any one contract for the city to be under with the police.
Thank you. Craig?
Yeah, I haven't read it either. But just a couple thoughts. One of the things that I learned is while I've been on the OPPD board is what is my role in all of this, and I think that's something that I need to learn more about as city council members, is when it comes to negotiating contracts, whether it's the police, fire, civilian union, or otherwise. My suspicion is that our job is not to negotiate that; it's to approve it or turn it down, and so. I'm mindful of that. I don't know what it looks like. I haven't read it, and I think the 5-year thing seems kind of odd, especially given how things are a little bit complicated right now. But I also don't want. I wouldn't want to, as a council member, until there's something to look at and for us to vote up or down, get myself into the weeds of that, because honestly, that's not. I don't think that's probably my job. To Cammy's point earlier, like the defund the police conversation, I think is an important one. And I'll go back to the outcomes question, like by giving the police money, what are the outcomes we're getting out of that? And I think that's an important question that we should get an answer to before we spend a lot of time talking about where the money is going to go. I think the reality is, and the conversations that I've had lead me to conclude that the police spend far more time than they would want to, and that we would want them to on mental health issues. I've heard that firsthand, is that's not what they're trained to do. We have mental health professionals that should be spending a lot of their time doing that work. And I think I would be surprised if we went through a process to get to what are the outcomes and didn't arrive at a conclusion where we're probably spending too much money on police. 2 more things real quick. Somebody mentioned this earlier, but I just want to reinforce the importance of collecting, analyzing, and sharing data around all of this. OPD puts some data out there, but we can do a much better job of collecting that and putting it out there so that people can really use it. And then the last thing that I would say is the establishment of an independent community oversight body that has full access to police records, subpoena power, authority to conduct investigations. The citizens need to take a little bit of control back in some ways. And I think having that independent community oversight body would be a large step in the right direction to giving citizens, coupled with better data, more clarity around the activities of our police department.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We are at 3 o'clock and we explored a lot of subjects today. So I'm going to turn it to Jacqueline and we're going to close out.
Before we close, I do want to say thank you all again and thank you for everyone watching. I do want to give everybody just one quick wrap up minute. Obviously, we talked about a lot of amazing things and you've all offered some great information. I just want to make sure everyone knows how to get in touch with you. And again, restate the main reason that you're running, and I'll just call you through really quick. So let people know how to stay in contact with you and your campaign. And then again, why you're here running for this city office. I'll start with Sarah.
Okay, you can follow me on Facebook. The page is called Smolen for Omaha, the number 4, because it's District 4. Also, I'm on Twitter. Smolen for Omaha is the handle. And you can go to my website, smolenomaha.com, and contact me through there. And finally, yeah, I am running for city council because I want to make government more accessible to the people that it serves.
Awesome. Destiny.
You can reach me on my Facebook page, Destiny Stark for Omaha City Council. You can also email me, destinystark4, spelled out FOR, council@gmail.com. I want to make sure that everyone in my district is well represented, especially those that don't feel that the city and state properly represents them and is welcoming and wants to keep them here. So I want to be a voice. It's FOR, council. I want to make sure that they have that caring voice and know that someone is going to listen to them and try to work for them.
Thank you. Jonathan.
All right. Again, my name is Jonathan Lathan. I'm running for the District 2 City Council seat, which covers North and Northeast Omaha. You can reach me at Lathan4FOR2021 at gmail.com. Also have a website that's LathanFOR2021.com. I'm on Facebook, Jonathan Lathan, Lathan. I have a public page. I'm always open to questions and comments and concerns. I said the biggest reason I'm running is because I believe that it's time for my district specifically to start rebuilding. One of the things that I mentioned previously, as I tell people all the time, and it's not, everybody goes on KETV.com, they go on the Omaha scanner site and they see that North Omaha is the area of town that is blasted the most by individuals with racist and degenerate comments that don't need to be had. So if we can start becoming more sustainable and start controlling the narrative, then I feel that that would benefit our residents the most as far as the rest of the city sees us and start moving us toward the future that we want to have in North Omaha. So again, thanks everybody for attending. Like I said, I appreciate you guys for giving me the time to at least talk about my platform and telling people why I'm running and why I want to make the city of Omaha better.
Sure. Mark.
Thank you. My name is Myles Vondrasek, and I'm running for city council because I believe that workers should be in charge of the government, of our homes, and of our jobs. I'm going to be a different kind of candidate. I'm not going to make friends with people who are our opponents and our enemies. I'm going to work for workers first, and that's the kind of city councilor I'll be. Look me up on Facebook at Mark in Midtown. Mark in Midtown. Thanks.
Craig.
First, thanks to Noise and Jaqueline. Thanks for organizing this. This is an extraordinarily interesting conversation. So I want to thank all of you for taking the time. I really enjoyed this. I'm running for City Council District 3 alongside Mark and Cammy. You can reach me at craigmoody.org. I dropped in the chat, or cm@craigmoody.org. Phone number's in there as well. Feel free to call anytime. I think we're at an inflection point as a community. And it's time to really invest in, pushing Omaha towards being a progressive, inclusive community. That to me is really what I'm looking to do, and it aligns with my personal mission to catalyze systemic change for the better. And I think I'm well suited to help the city make that leap. Thanks again for having me.
Of course. And Cammy.
So again, I'm Cammy. You can find us on our website, which is Cammy4council.com. We're also on Instagram, LinkedIn, and or Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The only one that does not have the 4 is Twitter, which is Cammy, the written out 4 council. And I love this. I loved having this conversation. I loved hearing. And Mark, I love your explanation around abolitionist. And like for me, that helps me think about this differently. And that's exactly why I'm running, is that I think it's important that even though we have opposing views with people, as an activist and community organizer, that's my responsibility to actually listen to people who might see things differently than me, and then let that influence my perspectives and change. And I think we need more people in office that are willing to hear other people's perspectives and shift. And whether or not I take on 100% of what someone else has had to say, I 100% make my decisions and let that influence how I go forward. So I want to be a city council member that grows through learning and recognizes that we are an ever evolving, changing world. And that's absolutely necessary for us to be the community that we need to be in general.
Yeah, again, thank you all so much for being here. An amazing conversation. For everyone listening, please get in contact with these folks if you're going to be your representatives, which we hope. I'm an individual, so I can endorse all of these amazing people. But Culxr House is a nonpartisan entity, so they can't do any endorsements, but we're so glad that they were able to help us host this event, along with Noise for live streaming and helping us facilitate those questions. So get in contact with your hopeful representatives and make sure we keep this conversation going. As for us, we plan to continue having these conversations in all of the offices. So look forward to next year where we host a mayoral candidate forum as well. So thank you all again, and we'll talk soon.